I've really been trying to leave the mindset of the art world and capture something of the language and the consciousness of underclass America. I mean, forget about people don't read any cultural references.
I'm Ben Davis, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. Kraus is one of the most well-known contemporary art writers. She is also an important tastemaker, co-editor of independent publisher Semiotext, which played a key role in introducing French theory to U.S. audiences. But Kraus is probably best known today as a novelist. Her 1997 autobiographical novel, I Love Dick, became a buzzy literary reference in the 2010s and a model for auto-fiction. It was even made into an Amazon show. This fall, Kraus put out a new novel titled The Four Spent the Day Together. It has a cryptic three-part structure that I think I should set up here. The first part focuses on a young woman named Catt Greene. Drawing heavily on Kraus's own life, it describes a childhood growing up in Connecticut, being bullied, and dreaming of leaving the hardships of her depressing lower-class life behind through experiments with drugs and sex, activism, and art. The second part of the book focuses on Catt many decades later, now an art critic and novelist who has found unexpected success with a novel called I Love Dick, which is being made into an Amazon show. But it also focuses on the character of Paul, Catt's husband, an addiction counselor who struggles with addiction himself, which slowly tears the couple apart. Like the real-life Kraus, the character Catt Greene owns properties in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which she rents out. Like Kraus, Greene is attacked by online critics in the late 2010s for being a landlord. This leads to part 3 of the book. Feeling demonized and that her own life is running out of raw material to turn into literature, Catt Greene finds herself drawn to investigating a real-life murder in bleak, rural Minnesota. The character of Catt Greene and Kraus, through her, attempt to reconstruct the grisly facts of the case and try to make sense of it. That's probably enough setup. Kraus joins me to talk about her writing, her life, and her new book. Kraus, nice to talk to you this morning.
Thanks. You too, Ben.
Where are you at?
I'm home in LA.
Well, I am very excited to talk to you about this novel. It's complicated to talk about. You know, you make complicated, difficult to talk about work. The Four Spent the Day Together is largely told through Catt, a character who is a novelist who also writes about art like you. And I feel like her sense in the book and your sense of what art represents is very complicated. And since this is an art podcast, I wanted to start there. How do you think about the art world now? What does it represent to you?
Early on, when I just started to write about art from a pretty outsider and amateurist perspective, the pieces that I wrote for Art Text that were collected in Video Green, written in the first person, originally written as a column, I was taking a more anthropological view of the art world because it was still kind of foreign and interesting to me. And of course, sort of, how many different ways can I poke the bear and how will the bear respond? But eventually, say by the time I published Where Art Belongs and Social Practices, I was much more embedded in the art world. I was teaching regularly in MFA art programs, and I was invited to write catalog essays for major artists for blue chip galleries. So I was coming from a much more insider place. And I think my writing also changed as a consequence of that relationship, became a little more serious, a little less, quote, irresponsible. I wasn't going to sort of write a whole essay about my kinky sex adventures and then mention the art in the last paragraph. I was treating the art, with the seriousness that it deserves. But maybe I was getting a little jaded and burnt out on that high seriousness. So I guess at the moment that you see Catt as an art critic in the novel, she's realizing that the catalog essays are just kind of a glorified form of advertising for the artist and wondering why she's spending so much time doing this.
Yeah, that's literally something the character says in the book. And the character, I want to ask you about this, but, it's sort of autobiographical, but not in that very Chris Kraus way. I mean, did want to start with you as an art writer, not just because I'm really interested in your art writing, but I think you played a really important role for art writers in the 2010s, which is partly when this novel is set, that because of your connection to theory and the fact that was very important in the 2000s. That's what brought me into art writing was critical theory. But then your voice also pivoted towards this more personal, voicey driven style of art narration that became the major currency of the 2010s in the social media age. And you also brought, which you really see in the character of Catt in this novel, this sense of scrutinizing the power dynamics, the class microdynamics of the art world. So yeah, I think you see all that in there. So I did want to start with asking you about how you think the evolution of you as an art writer.
Yeah. Well, the great antecedent, I feel like, for my work was Jill Johnston. She was such a powerful influence and definitely an influence on Bruce Hanley, Gary, Indiana. Do you know Jill Johnston's work?
I don't
Oh,
actually. That means that some people in our audience won't
she
either.
was an
So,
amazing writer. Axel Weeder, when he was at Bergen a few years ago, actually did an entire exhibition devoted to Jill Johnston's work as a critic. She was a Village Voice dance critic in the early 1960s and later kind of more of a public personage in kind of feminism and lesbian activism. She was so witty. And she would write these endless kind of stream of consciousness pieces for her Village Voice column. Her voice kind of loosened up increasingly over the years from straight criticism to these kind of stream of consciousness rants that were just so incredibly brilliant. She was such a strong influence for me on what you could do as an art writer. And all of that, of course, it's not about the writer per se, who really cares about the writer. It's about the act of directly accessing the work in the present moment. You know, as the writer is doing it, vicariously, the reader is doing it too. The reader is piggybacking on the writer's encounter with the work. And that's what it offers. That's the kind of electrical charge of that kind of approach.
and I guess the class scrutiny, because I really feel like that's the major theme of this novel. You know, even the journey of this novel from the first part of the novel is about the character's childhood growing up, which very closely mirrors some of the things about your childhood, as I understand it. And the sense that culture is aspirational and a way out of the kind of inertia and small mindedness of a certain kind of American lower class or lower middle class experience.
Well, art is the escape from all class experience.
Oh, well, ideally, yeah. But it's not, though, really, in the novel. I mean, it's interesting you say that because, I mean, the novel is extremely jaded and cynical about the art world, and the character, at least, finds the art world kind of repellent in it that exact sense that you just talked about of transcending class. Like the character sees privilege everywhere in the art world in a way that is unacknowledged and unforegrounded, and almost like the journey of the novel is like to say, let's talk about what really goes on with money and the life experience that doesn't get talked about.
Okay, that's a really big question. So let's take it apart a little bit into some pieces. The first is I certainly wasn't trying to express any disgust for the art world in the book. You know, there's 5 pages in a 300 and some page book that talks about the cancel culture of the 2010s, but the art world is much bigger than that. You know, I wouldn't say that my relation to the art world is one of disgust. I have a huge affinity and affection and gratitude towards a number of artists' work that have really changed my life. And same goes for the galleries and the curators, the whole structure that facilitates that. But I've also, as a writer, having grown up working class, a thing that I've never really talked about explicitly until this book, having grown up working class, aware of the class situation of people coming to the art world as outsiders. You know, I wrote a lot about Julie Becker's work, and I felt a tremendous affinity with Julie's situation. You know, her early success, her presence at CalArts, coming from such a precarious background, her dad working at a Home Depot, certain artists that I have felt close to. come from these precarious backgrounds that seem very underrepresented in American culture and increasingly underrepresented. I taught for years in the MFA program at Art Center. Great program, really interesting people. But I've got to say, the people whose parents were things like college professors and architects and lawyers felt like the underclass because other people, their peer competitors, were coming from such wealth that they could count on family support way beyond grad school. And that's really what it takes now. If you're going to live in a major city and enter the art world, I can't really see a way of doing it unless you have an independent income stream. And that's become increasingly true over the last 10 or 20 years. So people like Julie just kind of slipped through the cracks.
Yeah, well, I was reading the interview you did with Jared Ernest in the book What It Means to Write About Art, which is a collection of important art writers. And the point you make about the imprint you do with semiotext, you say, we don't publish stories about people on the Upper East Side, talking about their daily routine. You've always had like this attention to outsiderness within these kind of cultural spheres. One of my favorite art essays that you've written is one that was published in this book called Academy X, where you talk about art as this interesting space that is kind of like accumulating practices that kind of lose their ability to make money elsewhere. Like kind of absorbs other things. I always think of that as
Yes.
the Chris Kraus lint trap idea of what art represents right now.
Yeah, that's so funny. I had this epiphany when I was invited to visit at UCSG one year, their fine art program, and everyone in that program was doing something other than studio art. There was one
Yeah.
woman doing translations, another person making piñatas, another person setting up an alternative school. And I thought about it and I realized that each of those occupations, they exist in the world, but they're not given much value or prestige. And by pulling them under the umbrella of the art world, it gives them a scrutiny and a glamour and a visibility that they totally lack now. I mean, who wants to be a translator? Just put it into Google, right? There's no glamour there. A school teacher, forget about it. I mean, that's just like a garbage collector. That's just the lowest of the low. And yet there's so many creative possibilities within these occupations. They're not just crafts, they're not just artisanal. Just as their cultural weight diminishes in the larger world, they get sucked into the art world, and the art world becomes the last refuge for experimentation and world building.
Related to that is you straddle the worlds of art and letters or literature. Gosh, it seems like a lot of recent novelists are writing art novels or about the art world. Do you have a theory about that? Like why people are drawn to the art world as a subject or a milieu?
Nobody gets it right. So let's name some names. What art novels are you talking about?
Well, I'm thinking of Rachel Kushner's The Flamethrowers to Hari Kunzru's Blue Ruin, which came out last year. We interviewed him on the show.
Catherine Lacey did a fantastic art world book, The Biography of X. Did you read that one?
No, no.
So good. So good.
What do you think people get wrong, though, in general?
Well, I mean, whenever there's a movie like Art School Confidential, right? Whenever people try and capture the sort of social pecking order, the whole sort of social schema of the art world, they get it wrong. People are more covert than they're depicted. And, of course, intelligence is always more complicated than it's depicted in a kind of mainstream ready movie or book.
Having done a little study of artist movies themselves, I think you really see that culture has really only two gears when it comes to why they think about artists. They're either they represent the ecstatic, pure truth of creativity that most people can't access and pure consciousness, pure living, like Vincent van Gogh, or they represent total phonies and frauds and intellectual pretension.
I totally agree with you. And that's so false, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a big, wide space to play in
Yes.
between those two poles, and that's most of
Of
reality.
course, there's politics and intrigue, but so is there in every profession. I don't think there's any more kind of intrigue and backstabbing and, all of that in the art world than the legal profession or any other world.
I guess this is the moment when I should pivot to asking you about the novel and what makes it difficult to talk about. I mean, it is true of all your novels that it's a kind of you yourself are and are not a character in them. What is the relationship of this novel to your biography or to autobiography?
It's such a tricky question, and I don't know why people fixate on that aspect so much. I mean, there's so many writers that use themselves as a narrator, that use their presence as a guide to the different worlds that they're exploring. You know, Christopher Isherwood, novel after novel that comes from his life, but I wouldn't really say that he's writing autobiography. He's writing fiction. I mean, the French tradition of literary fiction, I mean, Proust is a character in his novels, but it's not really, it's about what he sees. And that's always really what I've aimed to do. I'm present in the book, but I'm not the central character in the book. It's about the worlds that I'm moving through and what I see, the observations that I make while I'm there. I don't even really think that I'm the protagonist. The character, Catt Greene, in this book is not really the protagonist of the book. It's really much more about Paul Garcia's addiction, just as he was the protagonist of Summer of Hate. She's there, she's a character. And, because most of my readers are in the art world, and that's a thing that I've always really appreciated. My character, sort of as the sort of art world figure, has to be there as a hook. But the people I'm writing about are of much greater interest, and it's like their trajectories that I'm really trying to follow. I've set out to write kind of a mini epic about working class life in America over nearly a century, from the lives of my parents in the aspirational Bronx in the mid 20th century, all the way to northern Minnesota, the Rust Belt, and the lives of these kids at the end of the 20 teens in 2019. That's a bandwidth of like 70 or 80 years. And it's astonishing to me the devolution of working class life from the experience of my parents who went to public school. And my mother's favorite subjects were French and Latin, subjects that are never taught in public schools anymore. The kids don't even really go to school. They have online school as an option, which really means no school at all. When Trump won the first time in 2016, all of the media swarmed to the Rust Belt, and people spent 3 or 4 days doing interviews and writing their stories about the white working class. That became a new focus of interest. How did the white working class turn MAGA? And yet, these stories didn't really capture any of the reality of these people's lives, who they are, what they think, how they feel, how they experience things. And that's what I wanted to do. I mean, since writing Summer of Hate that came out in what, 2012 or 13, I've really been trying to leave the mindset of the art world and capture something of the language and the consciousness of underclass America. I mean, forget about people don't read any cultural references beyond this very kind of narrow feed of internet mass culture that they're exposed to. Just the language, the use of language. I tried to highlight that in the appendix of the book by reproducing the text messages that the kids sent back and forth verbatim. This is their language is consciousness, you know?
So that's really interesting. That unlocks something for me about the book, which has what is to me a sort of enigmatic three-part structure, but does begin with the character of Kat's interaction with her father, this sort of piece of wordplay over a bucket frozen in the ice, that it's an ice bucket, it's a nice bucket, and the kind of joy of discovering this kind of poetic figure. And then, yeah, this is something Elvia Wilk brought out in her review of the book for 4 columns, that it's really a book about language and ends with these sort of catalogs of text messages centered around this crime. And what you just said that unlocked for me was the narrative of like epochal degeneration in the relationship to language from
Yeah.
that kind of aspiration towards a kind of working class intellectualism towards a sort of much more emptied out kind of experience
Yes, absolutely.
with not a lot of meaning in it.
Absolutely. I spent 2.5 years researching the crime. I talked to more than 100 people. I visited the kids in prison, had correspondences with them, and got to know their friends, families, everyone in the community, the police, the social workers, the teachers. And I mean, there's no excusing what they did. This guy is dead and he doesn't need to be. There's hundreds of mitigating circumstances. And I'm kind of in awe of how these people manage to put their lives together given the circumstances that they're living in.
The novel is a story of an attempted act of empathy or to find meaning of the crime. Or that's one of the stories. Like, I mean, I guess I feel like you're more of a character, or the cat is more of a character, central character. Maybe you're saying here. I mean, there's a lot of her story in this novel, although it does thread back and forth with her husband Paul and his struggles with alcoholism. But then there's this novelist character does literally have a moment saying like I've done a lot of work about myself. Maybe my own life is exhausted as a subject matter, and as almost a political gesture, turns towards trying to investigate this world.
Trying to understand the crime is, kind of a tautology in a way, because there's a line in the book where she's talking to one of the homicide detectives. He's been on the job for almost 20 years. Every single homicide that he has investigated on the Iron Range had to do with methamphetamine. So this idea of a whodunit, a true crime story with a motive like greed or sexual jealousy, that's really archaic. I mean, there's all these kind of atrocious violent crimes that are being committed by people just whacked out of their minds on meth psychosis. I mean, I felt it was like the first movie of the 21st century. Did you ever see the movie Gomorrah?
No, I haven't.
It's about the Sicilian mafia, and it came out, I guess, on the heels of The Sopranos. And the difference between The Sopranos and Gomorrah is like night and day. Gomorrah was adapted from a book. He had death threats put out against him by the Sicilian mafia. And the killings are so mechanical, cold, and routine. It's like multi-level marketing. They have a foot in every pie in this society, in construction, in municipal politics, in the garment industry. It's all business, and that's all it is. You know, you look for a larger motivation. You look to these kind of humanistic motives, psychological motivations, but there are none. There are none.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's an important part of the present that we need to recognize.
Is the kind of structural causality or the kind of larger just crime of disintegration, I guess.
Yes,
In that sense, I mean, I think it's a really harrowing and bleak final section in many, many ways that sort of follows some conventions of true crime, of like a horrible thing happens, everyone's trying to understand, to try and get the bottom of it. But it does sort of end with a sense that it may not be possible to get to the bottom of that. There's also a great awareness, though, of the cat character's position, like negotiating the ability to even cross the line of empathy. Like, I guess I'm asking you, is this based on real experience? Puts up flyers to ask, meth, interested in talking to people who are meth users, and gets no response. Some of the narrative is about people saying, like, I'm hearing that there's a writer asking around. It's best if you just stop asking around. No one wants to talk to you.
yes, that's all true. That all happened.
So it is really not just the story of, a world that doesn't lack meaning, but of also kind of like lines that might not be possible to cross, correct?
Well, whether I interviewed a meth user in Harding, Minnesota or not, or, whether the meth community, as they call it up there, kind of warned people not to talk about me, um, it doesn't really change your ability to access what it's like to grow up there by talking to dozens and dozens of people. It's not as if a meth user had talked to me, some secret would have been revealed. Um, it's not like that. If you spend the time and you get to know the people, you get a sense of what it's like to live there. I found so many aspects of it so touching and fascinating. A lot of the kids had grown up in child protective services, foster homes, group homes, floating around, and the way that they struggled to create their own families in the app, that really got to me. I had goosebumps. And the way things are, the accomplice, whose name is Evan in the book, was removed from his mother. His dad had already left when he was 5 years old because his mom had sold him and his siblings into child prostitution. And after that, it was just a series of foster homes and group care, and nothing ever quite worked out. And before moving to Harding, he has a girlfriend who's pregnant. He really believes that he can save her and create a small, stable family, and he can help her raise the kid if she just doesn't give the child away, if she continues the pregnancy and doesn't go for adoption. And of course, it's impossible. Everything is stacked against them. They haven't even finished high school. There are no jobs up there. They have no stable families to fall back on. The odds against them are just so overwhelming. You have to ask yourself, how would you do if you were teleported into that situation? Would you do any better than them? And I doubt it.
Part of the novel is the character doing this investigation, and an aspect of that investigation is, yeah, sifting through social media, like looking at the traces people left behind, their playlists, their Facebook posts, their text messages. And I think there's this larger, like you say, epic story of the decline of American life that the book is about. There's also a story of the 2010s in it that I just want to flesh out because it's something that's come up a lot with guests this last year. I mean, I think everybody's kind of trying to figure out what happened in the 2010s, this very sharp degeneration in public discourse that people are navigating. The loss of empathy is a bit of is a character in that story and a character in the book. The character who wrote a novel called I Love Dick talks about, and this is, I think, true of your own story, the novel becoming big on social media and then processing the fact that feeling like it was kind of becoming memeified, no longer that the real story in it wasn't what people were connecting with. And then there's a moment when social media also turns on the character. So this is all a long way of getting to the question of what's your theory of social media's impact on politics and culture in the 2010s and how that fits into this story?
Well, I mean, I don't really have a theory. That's, kind of not my job. But
I think the character has a theory in the book.
no, I was very surprised in the 2010s. The cultural world kind of piggybacked onto the bullying and cruelty of the MAGA world. I thought it would be the opposite. I thought people would do a 180, turning away from that kind of bullying. But instead, people embraced it for themselves and exercised it themselves. And I never really understood that because, after all, we in the art world, aren't we in the cultural world because we were all bullied, because we're all some kind of outsiders, was very shocking and surprising to me. I didn't really get it. I mean, and that bullying is the kind of theme that runs through the book. There's, Catt is bullied when she's 10 years old in her little blue collar town. Brittany, the girl in the crime, is bullied when she's on the school bus in her little town. And then in late middle age, Catt is bullied online. The bullying is sort of such an American thing.
I'll be honest with you, Chris, I hadn't read the novel or read about the novel when we decided to do this. I just knew that I wanted to interview you. And I knew that I would have to ask about, there's some kind of controversy. That's how you process these things, is like some kind of amorphous sense around somebody. That's how social media controversy works. And then I realized reading the novel, there's no way to not talk about it. I mean, the novel, the character, it is essentially about a character who is attacked online for being a landlord. I mean, I guess you say it's just a couple of pages in the whole novel, but one way to read the novel is that there's this meme of you, that Catt Greene as a landlord becomes a meme in the novel, and that you yourself have a life as a property owner and kind of like going through your personal narrative, saying, like, people don't know me. This is my real story. This my a sense of reality I want to convey.
It was more of a plot. Once I decided that I wasn't just going to write about the crime, but it wasn't going to be a
Mm.
traditional true crime book, and it was going to cover this bigger bandwidth of experience, I had to explain how the character Kat even came to northern Minnesota. Why was she there in January 2019 to read about the crime? Otherwise, she never would have known about it. So the whole experience of living alongside her partner's addiction and then the online bullying and Catt Greene as a landlord, all of that, of course, came into the story because it was part of the story of that time, around the time that she slash me was reading about the crime. The whole thing is so ridiculous. I don't need to exonerate myself against people who are telling me Donald Trump because I own a handful of units and property manage them. That's just absurd.
It's interesting that the true crime part started first. I mean, you literally, or the character. Gosh, I keep slipping between the two. This is the problem, isn't it? Literally says in the novel, views her critics as not just unfair, but also as basically coming from a place of privilege, essentially. There's a line in the book that essentially says she thought by doing this, she'd become a character in other people's stories. She thought by doing this, she might be able to connect to a reality that her critics couldn't see or didn't want to connect to. It reads very much to me like directly like people calling you the oppressor and being like, I'll tell you what the real reality of America is.
It's just silly. Not all of them read Summer of Hate. Um, but there was an interview that I did about that novel for The Believer with Sheila Heti, a writer who I really like and respect. And she asked me very straight up, because Summer of Hate has a lot to do with buying apartments in Albuquerque. That's how she meets Paul Garcia, and buying and fixing these low income apartments as a way to make a living, but also as a kind of social project. There are certainly easier ways to invest money than to buy distressed low income housing, rehab it, and rent it to low income people. So Sheila was coming from a place, a generation younger than me, people struggling with how to live and work as artists. Any tips that I had for how to support yourself as a writer, right? So we talked a lot about that. And I always considered that for a long time. It was kind of my day job. I'd be about to go on a panel in Chicago and then I'd get a call about a leaky toilet. I was juggling those two things at once. And because I have that taste for the collision between high and low, something about that
Mm-hmm.
suited me that that would be my day job. Anyways, people picked up on that and it became Exhibit A. But it's absurd. I didn't set out to necessarily exonerate myself by writing about it because really, who cares? But just to kind of lay out in a completely factual basis what happened
Yeah.
in the same way that I'm reporting about the crime. I mean, throughout the book, I really try to restrain myself from making any value judgments or commenting on these situations. I'm simply reporting them, and people can draw their own conclusions from there.
I mean, you've been very clear about the mythology of the artist is built on a lot of lies. I mean, this is in from other interviews you've done, and that people should be straightforward about how they live, what it means to be an artist. Do you feel like you're a victim of your own candor?
I mean, I don't consider myself a victim, but I do think that people have used that candor. People have taken my candor and used it, right? I've always felt, and this beginning with I Love Dick, as soon as I started writing seriously, I already had such a backlog of people that I really loved and admired and cared for who had tried to be artists and kind of fell along the wayside for various reasons. I remember when I was 25 years old in New York City, to me, the burning question was, will I still be able to do this when I'm 40? Will I be an artist when I'm 40? And I think that's an essential question that we really try and push under the table. I was able to continue being an artist largely because I met Sylvain and he supported me. So I disclosed that and I love Dick. And as someone, I grew up as a Marxist. The Marxist ideas are very important to me and very credible to me. And so I always thought it's very important to kind of put that on the table. How are you living? how do you support yourself? Because it certainly is not possible in this economy, in this world. Only the most spectacularly commercial, accessible, on that level, successful people are able to live off the proceeds of their art. The humanities are being eviscerated. There's hardly any tenure track jobs. So there goes academia as well. So, really, how are you living? Because if you don't say that, the mythology is that you're enjoying this position as an artist because you're so much better than all the others who fell by the wayside. And that simply isn't true.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the realities of whatever we've come to call cancel culture, the cancel culture wars, I do think whatever privilege is expressed through it, it's also, at least in the cultural sphere, very much the product of downwardly mobile world of people who sort of anticipated a certain kind of experience. There were promises made in MFA programs of all kinds about kinds of careers you might have that collide with the reality. And then that leads people, it's dry tinder for people to like find someone on the next rung above them to go after.
Yeah, it's true. I think MFA programs that really exacerbates it. I mean, I witnessed this over the years teaching at Art Center. Several generations of students, if micro generations of students. And some of them become immediately successful right after school. And the MFA immediately pays off. Some of them go into other professions altogether, but some of them have this dormancy. I mean, they continue working under the wire all those years, and something kicks in all those years later in terms of their careers. So it's really hard to say. I mean, I don't have an MFA. I was, at the tail end of the world where you didn't really need an MFA. I went to New York instead of getting an MFA. I paid in other ways, I apprenticed myself on the most personal level to older artists who were my teachers that I admired. I did all kinds of things, in payment, as opposed to paying money to an institution that gave me a degree. But you always pay.
I think one of the most harrowing moments in the book is not in the true crime, the Minnesota section. It's the section where Paul, the husband character, who's an addiction counselor, goes to meet an artist, an older female artist that the character, the author, had known in New York, who had a career and then that career has declined and has now like sunk into addiction. And she is the character who links the character of Paul to, I believe, Oxy. And just the description of it was very vivid. And I just don't think something people talk about very much. It's like the light is always on in the refrigerator in the art world. You see you see the successful rediscoveries. You don't see the unsuccessful rediscoveries and what that really means for people.
That was really a tragic story. And I mean, I think it's pretty clear who the character was based on. People in the art world will know right away who the character was based on. And that was very sad.
So finally, I guess I have to ask about self-destructive impulses because I feel like that's a theme of the book. This impulse to assert yourself, whatever the cost, and difficulty of changing bad habits and just the constant confrontation with an unforgiving world, whether it's the sort of addiction narratives in the novel or the character in the novel, Catt's, inability to leave an alcoholic relationship. This novel returns to these like controversies, reopens these old wounds of stuff about Catt Greene as a landlord and so on. I think some people might have just adapted to the moment or pretended to be contrite in public. You've instead chosen to write a novel that steers directly into these kind of like difficult topics.
Well, that's what a writer does.
So it's the risk of doing it. I mean, I guess that's my question is it's like there's this kind of Krausian instinct to steer into the thing that's hardest to talk about.
Well, the job of the novel is to describe the world as the writer sees it. And if you're not doing that, you're not really a very good writer. So, I mean, I'm not trying to be controversial. It's funny, this has just come up recently. I'm doing a conversation with the Norwegian artist Vibeke Tandberg for her retrospective. And I saw that happening in Vivica's career, that part of her work, she's, I guess you would say, a conceptual artist. People would misread her openness for provocation. She's not trying to be provocative. She's simply moving through the world and addressing situations in an open way that may lead to conflict, but her goal is not to stir provocation. Well, Penny Arcade, the performance artist, has a wonderful phrase for that, to go through life with your eyes pinned open. I think that's what an artist does.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been a very interesting conversation.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you've heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, take a moment to rate and review The Art Angle. It helps other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili, with contributions from Kate Brown, Ben Davis, Caroline Goldstein, and Naomi Ray. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.